Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we bring some joy to the world by talking about prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and many more. But today I wish we were reading about Elisha.
Elisha? Hey, buddy. I think that you got your Shabbatot mixed up. We read about Elisha next week. Why do you want to read about him this week?
Well, Elisha is the prophet who cured the child of the Shunammite woman, and my family could use Elisha right now. We all have COVID.
All of you? Even Millie?
Yep, even Millie. It was an inauspicious ending to a fantastic trip to Sedona and Monument Valley, celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. More on that in a moment. First, I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine that I can hardly taste, and talking Haftarah with my very good chaver, Rick Muller. How are you doing, Rick?
Clearly better than you. The real question is, how are you guys?
I think that I'm getting better. I'm taking Paxlovid. After a couple of rough days, I can honestly say that I'm feeling human again. But nothing can dampen the joy that we all felt on our vacation.
And I'm sure that Millie was a big part of that.
Absolutely, Rick. And it's been a long time since we've had an It's Millie Time segment. So why don't we get right to it? Millie had a ball on the trip. She was right in her element. She loves rocks.
I see she has one in each hand.
And of course, she had a great time hiking.
Looks like more riding than hiking.
True, but she had some adventures on her own 2 feet. And she even got to pretend drive.
Her driving looks like her hiking. But she sure looks happy there with her Zadie.
We were all happy. And she was looking forward to dressing up for Halloween this year.
I think you mean her parents were looking forward to dressing her up.
Yep, but she did get to dress up even though she couldn't go trick-or-treating. She was Amelia Earhart holding Amelia Bearhart.
Very funny. Very cute. I think it's time to talk some Haftarah, don't you?
Absolutely, Rick. First, from my point of view, it's really hard to understand the connection between the Haftarah and the Parsha. As we all know, Lekh L'kha is the origin story of the Jewish people. It's all about Abraham, his encounters with God, the promises made to him by God, Abraham's encounters with the kings of the area, his rescue of Lot, and the birth of Ishmael. In the Haftarah, there's just one line about Abraham.
Don't forget the first mention of circumcision. It's in there too.
Ouch.
But you're right that there's only one explicit reference to Abraham in the Haftarah in verse 8, and there he's given second place to his grandson Jacob. Ve'ata Yisrael avdi Yaakov asher becharticha zera Avraham ohavi.
But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, seed of Abraham, my friend.
I hear what you're saying, but I think there's other connections between the Parsha and the Haftarah that are more subtle, but they're there.
Rick, you'll have to point them out to me. But besides my difficulty in finding links between the Haftarah and the Parsha, I would think that trope-wise, this is going to be a real challenge for you. It's the least troperized Haftarah I've ever seen. There's just one Kadma v'Azla, one Pasik, and 3 Riviyas. And the Kadma v'Azla, Pasik, and one of the Riviyas are all on one verse, the second verse of the Haftarah, chapter 40, verse 28. You're always looking for the rare trope to see what the Masoretes thought was most important, but there's almost nothing there. What are you going to talk about?
Al tira, my friend. Don't be afraid. If we can't find a lot of fancy and rare trope, that's okay. We can still find trope and text to talk about, like the repeated use of the phrase al tira, which is also a link to the Torah reading.
Okay, I won't be afraid, but it will take some convincing. Let me at least give you my take on the Haftarah. First of all, it's interesting, and to me perplexing, that for this Haftarah, the sages chose to pick up on Isaiah chapter 40, just where they left off for the Haftarah for Shabbat Nachamu. What's going on is Isaiah here is that the Judean exiles are complaining that God no longer pays attention to them. Isaiah is answering that God does still hear them and that he is the God of old. There's even a wonderful, uplifting bit of poetry in the last verse of chapter 40. But they who trust in Adonai shall renew their strength. As eagles grow new plumes, they shall run and not grow weary. They shall march and not grow faint.
Exactly, man. That's good stuff.
Rick, I'm not saying that it's not good stuff. I'm just saying that it seems to have little connection to the themes of Lekh L'kha. But let me continue. Then in the first part of chapter 41, Isaiah, speaking for God, enters into a conversation with the other nations, boasting that those nations and their gods cannot match the power of the true God. Adonai brought victory from the east, and that's a clear reference to the king of Persia, Cyrus, who defeated the Babylonians and permitted the return of the Judean exiles. The other nations revert to simply repairing their idols.
I got to jump in here, man. There's connections here to the Parsha. First of all, the victor from the east is also understood as Abraham, who came from the east and helped the kings of Canaan as described in the Parsha. Next, in the Midrashim, it's Abraham who broke the idols. Then look at verse 6. Ish et re'ehu yazoru. A man helps his neighbor. And that's exactly what Abe is doing in this Parsha, helping out both his nephew Lot and the neighboring kings, rescuing the hostages.
Rick, I hear you, but it seems a stretch to me. Let me finish. In the concluding section of the Haftarah, the people are told not to fear, to be confident that they will defeat their enemies. Where do you see this connecting to the Parsha?
Like I told you, al tira, don't be afraid. This is the very phrase that God utters to Abraham in the Parsha, at the beginning of the story of the Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant between the parts. God says, Al tira Avram, Anochi Magen Lach, in Torah. Fear not, Abraham, I am a shield to you. And this is repeated 3 times in the Haftarah, in verses 10, 13, and 14. The covenant that God made with Abraham was that his offspring would inherit the land of Canaan. And this is also what Isaiah is reminding the exiles.
Rick, I cannot say that you've convinced me, but you've made some interesting, if tenuous, connections. How about if we get to the chanting, and perhaps in the discussion, we can flesh out some of those connections?
Flesh out, huh? You mean like the Brit Bein HaBetarim, those fleshy parts?
That's a bit too literal for me. Let's start the chanting with the end of chapter 40, verses 27 through 31, where Isaiah is telling the exiles that God can still listen to them. Then we'll chant the first part of chapter 41, verses 1 through 7, where God has a mock dialogue with the other nations. And we'll conclude with verses 8 through 16, where Isaiah turns to the exiles again and tells them not to fear.
That's fine. So let me start with verse 28, where, as you pointed out, we have the only rare tropes. It starts, Halo yadata, im lo shamata, the kadmav yazla, and don't you know, making it the most important verb of the Haftarah. And this is followed by another important verb, im lo shamata. Have you not heard? What do we really know? What do we really hear? This is the voice of the prophet trying to rouse the people. And he's doing it with some beautiful poetry, as you already mentioned. There's rhyme and rhythm, even without the trope. It's not just the last verse of the chapter. Listen to the beautiful simplicity of verses 29 and 30, and the simple trope match the text. Noten la'ya'ef koach, u'la'en onim otzma yarbe, v'yafu ne'arim v'yigau, u'vachurim kashol yikashelu.
Rick, that's true. And for once, I actually like the JPS translation.
You're kidding.
No, just this once. It goes, he gives strength to the weary, fresh vigor to the spirit. Youths may grow faint and weary, and young men may stumble and fall.
And if you like the English, you'll especially like the Hebrew when I chant it, which I'm going to do now. We start with chapter 40, starting with verse 27. You can follow along in the Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 95, or with the text on the screen, thanks to Norm Gar. But first the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Lama tomar Yaakov utedaber Yisrael nistara darki me Adonai ume Elohai mishpati ya'avor halo yadata im lo shamata Elohei Olam Adonai Borei Kitzot Haaretz Lo Yiaf Velo Yiga En Cheker Litvunato Noten La Yaef Koach Ulein Onim Otzma Yarbe Ve'yafu ne'arim ve'yiga'u uvachurim kashol yikashelu ve'koye Adonai yachalifu choach ya'alu ever kanesharim yarutzu ve'lo yiga'u Yelechu velo yiafu.
Rick, I do like the poetry. And like Hazino a few weeks ago, I appreciate the simplicity of the trope. Sometimes less is more.
There you go. Now in this next section, the beginning of chapter 41, continue to listen for the rhythm and meter of the poetry. It doesn't need the embellishment of any dramatic tropes.
I will when you chant it, but I do want to mention that I've had a chance to compare the JPS translation of this section to the Alter translation. And for these verses, I have to say that Alter captures the music of the text much better than JPS. I know that our viewers can check out the JPS translation in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, but allow me to just read the first two verses according to Alter.
Go ahead.
Be still for me, you coastlands, and let nations renew their vigor. Let them draw near and let them speak. Together let us come to trial. Who has stirred up victory from the east, called it to his feet? Who sets down before him nations and holds sway over kings, turns their sword into dust, like driven chaff, their bow.
Good stuff. I have a comment on the second verse, and in particular, the mi he'ir mi mizrach tzedek, which is translated as who has stirred up the victory from the east. Earlier, you mentioned that this referred to Cyrus, and I said that it could also be Abraham. But it also brings to my mind Malki Tzedek from Ir Shalem. This is yet another connection to the Parsha in chapter 14. Malki Tzedek was the original king of Jerusalem, an ethical Gentile king who was also a priest of El Elyon, which suggests that he knew the one true God. And Abraham did his best to get along with the locals, his Canaanite neighbors, and the other kings.
Rick, I'm sorry, but you're not going to convince me on this one. The Haftarah does not offer a vision of everyone just getting along. The world was a rough and tumble place, and Abraham's good neighborliness just wasn't in the cards for Isaiah.
Hey, I can have my interpretation, can I? Each one helps the other. It's right there.
Agree to disagree. Rick, chant verses 1 through 7 of chapter 41.
Acharishu Elai iyim ulaumim yachalifu choach yigshu az yidaberu yachdav lamishpat nikrava mi heir mi mizrach tzedek yikraehu leraglo yiten lefanav goyim umalachim yard yiten kafar charbo kekash nidaf kashto yirdefem ya'avor shalom orach beraglav lo yavo mifa'al ve'asa kore hadorot merosh ani Adonai rishon ve'et acharonim anihu ra'u iyim ve'yira'u kitzot ha'aretz Yecheradu karevu vaye'etayun ish et re'ehu yazoru ul achiv yomar chazak vayechazek charash et soref machalik patish et holem Pa'am omer la devek tovhu vayechazkehu v'masmerim lo yimot.
Rick, we come to the final verses of the Haftarah, and I have no fear about where you're going.
Like I keep saying, Al Tira, old buddy. If you look at the beginning of verses 10 and 14, you'll see the same pashta on Al Tira and then on Al Tir'i, fear not, don't be afraid. And even though the trope is different in verse 13, we have the same formulation. Each instance of don't be afraid is followed by Ki imcha ani, or Ani azartich, I am with you, or I'll be your help. How can one not directly connect this to the Parsha? Al Tira Avram, Anochi Magen Lach. Fear not, Abraham, I am a shield to you. In the Parsha, God promised to help Abraham against his enemies. In the Haftarah, God promises to help the exiles against their enemies.
Let's hope that today God's promises to help us against the bad guys of the world.
And the virus. And so it should be.
Rick, take us home by chanting to the end of the Haftarah.
Ve'ata Yisrael avdi Yaakov asher becharticha zera Avraham ohavi asher hechezakticha miktzot haaretz umeatzilecha kiraticha va'omar lecha avdi ata becharticha velo me'asticha al tira ki imcha ani al tishta ki ani Elohecha imatzticha af azarticha af temachticha bimin tzidki hen yevoshu v'yikalemu kol hanecharim bach yiyu che'ayin ve'yovdu anshe rivecha tvakshem velo timtsaem anshe matzutecha yiyu che'ayin uche'efes anshe milchamtecha ki ani Adonai Elohecha machazik yeminecha haomer lecha al tira ani azarticha al tir'i tola'at Yaakov mete Yisrael ani azartich num Adonai vegoalech Kedosh Yisrael hine samtich lemorag charutz chadash baal pifiyot tadush harim v'tadok ugvaot kamotz tasim tizreim v'ruach tisaim usara tafitz otam ve'ata tagil b'Adonai b'kadosh Yisrael titalal.
As always, thanks to Norm Gar for all the beautiful graphics, music, text, and editing, and especially for the way he does the It's Millie Time segments.
Great stuff.
Don't forget to write us with your thoughts and comments. Our emails are below, and if you like our video podcast, please forward the link to your friends and family. As I mentioned earlier, Rick and I have almost finished the entire cycle of Haftarot. We've got 13 more episodes to complete, but most of those are Haftarot for the holidays or for Haftarot not read every year. We're planning to finish them all in 5783, Bezrat Hashem. Our next new episode is planned for Shabbat Shalom in February. In the meantime, each week we'll provide the link for the episode of the Haftarah of the week, and who knows, perhaps a few bonus segments. Thanks for your loyalty. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.